It was a bright Sunday morning, but it felt like any other day in the Walker household, routine, predictable, and suffocating. I stood in the kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The walls of our mansion gleamed in their usual opulence, everything polished to perfection. It was a life that most would envy, yet I was nothing more than a shadow in this grand house. My name is Sarah Walker, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the invisible one in my family. To them, I was just the maid, the one who cleaned the house, served them their meals, and remained in the background, never allowed to take part in anything meaningful. My mother, Helen, had always been the perfect hostess, always poised and beautiful, making sure that the house was spotless and the family name was never tarnished. Then there was Charles, my father, a businessman with an iron grip on the family's finances. He made sure everything ran smoothly, except for the way he ran our lives. I was always reminded that I was lucky to be in a family like ours, but the truth was, I wasn't part of the family. I was merely a servant in my own home. And Ethan, my younger brother, the golden child, the one who was always praised, always taken care of. My parents couldn't do enough for him. His dreams were always seen as more important than mine. His needs always come first. I was invisible in their eyes, unless, of course, they needed something from me. It had always been this way. My father would bark orders at me to clean the garage, while Helen would ask me to run errands or cook meals for the family. They never noticed the sacrifice I made every day just to maintain the semblance of a perfect home. The one thing they never understood was that I had dreams of my own, dreams I was never allowed to pursue. The weight of this life was starting to suffocate me. I wanted more than just to be the background player in my family's life. But no matter how much I wanted it, it felt like I was trapped in a gilded cage. I could feel the walls closing in, and I couldn't breathe. One evening, as I was cleaning the dining room after dinner, I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones. The words they spoke pierced me deeper than anything I could have imagined. They thought I couldn't hear them, but I heard everything. Helen, she's lucky to even be here. A roof over her head, food on the table, what more does she want? She should be grateful she's not out there, struggling like the others. Charles, she doesn't have the drive. You can see it in her eyes. She'll never amount to anything more than a maid. The sooner she understands that, the better. Ethan, who needs her around anyway? It's like having a housekeeper whose family, she's in the way. She should just accept it. My heart shattered as I heard those words. They didn't see me as their daughter, their sister. No. To them, I was just the maid, someone to clean their mess and stay out of sight. I was their servant, their burden. But that night, something inside me snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. I went to my room and locked the door behind me. Tears flooded my eyes, but I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall freely, realizing just how much I had given to them, only to be treated like nothing. But what hurt the most was that I had allowed them to do it for so long. I had let them make me feel like I didn't deserve more. The next morning, I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep living this life. I had to get out. But how? What if they didn't let me? It was then that the phone rang. I almost didn't pick it up. My heart was still pounding from the night before, but something told me I should answer. When I did, the voice on the other end of the line sent a jolt through my body. "Hello, is this Sarah Walker?" "Yes, who's this?" I asked, wiping my eyes, trying to make myself sound normal. "This is Bradley Monroe, the CEO of Monroe Tech. I've heard a lot about your skills, and I'd love to offer you an opportunity to come in for an interview. I believe you're the kind of person we need at our company." The words hung in the air, echoing in my mind. Bradley Monroe, the CEO of one of the most successful tech companies in the country, and he wanted me. I could hardly believe it. It felt like a dream, but deep down, I knew this could be the chance I had been waiting for. This was the opportunity to escape, to finally break free from the prison my family had built for me. But as the excitement rushed through me, a familiar thought crept in. How could I leave my family behind? How could I abandon everything I knew? They would never forgive me. I would be alone. I thought about the life I had always dreamed of, one where I wasn't invisible, where I wasn't just a maid. I could finally have a future that was mine to shape, but it came at a cost. Would my family let me go? I told them about the job offer at dinner that evening. The moment I spoke the words, I knew I had made a mistake. The shock on their faces, the anger in my father's eyes, it was all too much. Helen, you're making a mistake, Sarah. You think you can just leave us and start over. You'll never make it without us. Charles, what kind of person would abandon their family like this? You have everything you need here. Ethan, you're nothing. You'll always be the maid, no matter where you go. Their words cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever felt. It was like they were trying to drag me back down, telling me that I wasn't worthy of the life I dreamed of. But inside, a fire had been lit. I had never realized how much I hated being treated like this until that moment. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind raced. Could I really do it? Could I really leave everything behind and start fresh? The next day, I went to the interview at Monroe Tech. The building was sleek, modern, and intimidating. As I walked in, I was greeted by Bradley Monroe himself. His confident smile and handshake gave me the reassurance I needed. He made me feel like I belonged. But as I sat in his office, facing him across a polished desk, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to change forever. Bradley's words were encouraging, his offer genuine, but my family's voices echoed in my mind. Would they ever forgive me for choosing myself over them? As I left the interview, feeling both hopeful and terrified, I realized that this was my chance to finally escape. But it wouldn't come without consequences. I would have to fight for it. Later that night, as I returned home, Ethan confronted me. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight, his eyes wild. "You're making a huge mistake," he spat. "You'll regret this." His words stung, but I didn't let them break me. I had come too far to turn back now. I walked away from the life I knew, ready to begin a new chapter. I didn't know what the future held, but I was no longer afraid to fight for it. As I packed my things, ready to leave the only home I'd ever known, I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I would either sink or swim. The moment I would prove to myself, and to them, that I was more than just the maid. The door closed behind me, and as I stepped out into the unknown, I couldn't help but wonder, had I made the right choice? Or had I just lost everything I had left? But one thing was for sure, I wasn't going back. When I walked out of the house that night, it felt as though the weight of the world had lifted from my shoulders. I had made my decision, I was leaving. There was no turning back now. The life I had known for the past 30 years, the constant barrage of insults and indifference was gone. My family, they would never understand. But for once, I was choosing me. I was choosing the chance to be seen, to be heard, to be more than just the maid. The next few days blurred together. The moment I stepped into Monroe Tech for the interview, I felt like I had entered a completely different world. I had been to fancy events, but this place was something else entirely. The sleek glass walls, the polished floors, the modern furniture, it was a world I never even dreamed of. I remember walking through the halls, my heels clicking sharply on the floor, my heart racing. I could feel the eyes of people around me, executives, assistants, tech developers, all working together in this incredible space. I didn't belong here, at least not yet, but I wasn't about to let that stop me. This was my chance. I had to prove myself, not just to Bradley Monroe, but to everyone who had ever told me I was nothing more than a servant. When I reached the office of Bradley Monroe, I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. I had been so sure of my decision to leave everything behind, but now, standing before the man who could change my life, the reality of it hit me. Would he really want me to work for him? I was just Sarah Walker, the girl from a broken home, someone who had only ever known how to clean and cook. But here I was, about to face my future head-on. Bradley was sitting at a sleek desk, a look of complete focus on his face as he looked over papers, his jawline sharp, his black suit perfectly tailored. He looked up at me when I entered, his gaze intense but welcoming. "Ms. Walker," he said, his voice smooth but commanding. "Please come in. I'm glad you could make it." I stepped inside and sat across from him, trying my best to keep my composure. He didn't know my past, didn't know what I had endured just to get to this moment. And maybe that was a blessing. For once, I was meeting someone who saw me as I could be, not as my family had defined me. "I have to admit, I was impressed with your resume," he said. "Your background in managing complex logistics, your ability to handle high-pressure situations, that's the kind of person I need. But I'm more interested in you, Sarah. Who are you, really?" I froze for a moment, unsure of how to answer. Who was I? I had spent so long being defined by my family, by what they said I was, that I hadn't stopped to ask myself that question. Who was I outside of the house I had been trapped in for so long? "I'm someone who's ready to prove that I can be more than what others have told me I am," I said, my voice firm despite the nerves twisting in my stomach. "I want to build something of my own. I want to show that I'm capable of so much more than what's been expected of me." Bradley didn't speak for a moment, but his eyes never left mine. There was a depth in his gaze, like he could see through all the layers I had built to protect myself. "I like that," he said, finally. "You've got ambition, but ambition alone won't get you far here. You'll need to be resilient, adaptable. This job won't be easy and it won't be glamorous. Are you sure you're ready for that?" I nodded without hesitation, feeling a fire inside me that I hadn't felt in years. "I'm ready," I said, voice steady. "Good," he said, standing up and walking around the desk toward me. "Because I'm offering you a chance to become something greater than just a cog in the machine. I want you to take charge of something big here at Monroe Tech. You'll have all the support you need to succeed. But the question is, Sarah, will you take the leap?" His words struck me like a lightning bolt. This wasn't just a job offer. This was an opportunity to change my life, to break free from everything that had held me back. I had spent my entire life doing what others expected of me, living in the shadows of my family's needs and desires. But here, now, was a chance to build my own future, to stand on my own 2 feet and be seen for the first time. I stood up, my heart racing, and extended my hand. "I'm in." Bradley shook my hand firmly, a knowing smile on his face. "Welcome to Monroe Tech, Sarah. We're going to do great things together." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. I moved into a small apartment in downtown Chicago, far from the mansion I had spent my entire life in. It was strange at first, being alone, but it was also exhilarating. No more cleaning up after my family, no more feeling invisible. I was building something new, something that was mine. But as I settled into my new life, I began to realize that leaving my family behind wasn't as simple as I thought. The calls started coming in. Helen, my mother, was the first. She wanted to know where I was, why I hadn't returned home, why I hadn't told her about my new job. It was as though nothing had changed. To her, I was still her daughter, and that meant I should still be at her beck and call. But then came the bombshell. Charles, my father, sent me a letter with the company's legal seal on it. He claimed that I was abandoning my responsibilities, that I was throwing away the privilege they had given me. The letter was scathing, accusing me of being selfish, of trying to destroy everything they had built. And then there was Ethan. He called me, his voice filled with venom. "You think you can just walk away from this family and have everything handed to you?" he sneered. "You're nothing without us. You're still just a maid, Sarah. You always will be." His words echoed in my mind, and I felt the familiar pang of shame that had followed me my entire life. But this time, it was different. I didn't feel the need to apologize. I didn't feel like I owed him anything. The calls grew more frequent. My family wanted me back, needed me to come home to play my role. But I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to be their maid any longer. Bradley, too, had started to notice the tension. He saw the way I withdrew, the way I second-guessed myself whenever I received another call from home. But he never pushed me. Instead, he gave me space to breathe, to figure out my own path. But just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, Bradley invited me to dinner one night. It was supposed to be a casual meeting about work, but the moment I walked into the restaurant, I realized it was much more than that. He was looking at me differently, like he saw something in me that no one else had, something more than the maid who had been abandoned by her family. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't scared. I wasn't scared to be seen. I wasn't scared to be something more. But that night, as we talked, I received a text. It was from Ethan. "You're making a huge mistake, Sarah. You'll regret it." And just like that, I realized that the battle was far from over. It wasn't just about escaping my family's control. It was about proving that I could thrive without them, that I could make my own way. And I wasn't going to let anything stand in my way. When I decided to leave my family behind and take a leap of faith into my new life at Monroe Tech, I had no idea how messy things would get. I thought I could simply walk away from the past, build a new future, and never look back. But I should have known better. The ties that bind family aren't easily broken. And the longer I stayed away, the more the cracks began to show. It started small at first. The constant calls and text messages from my mother, Helen, asking me to come home. To talk to my father, Charles. She didn't understand why I couldn't just come back like nothing had changed. I could hear the hurt in her voice, but also the anger, the frustration. She wasn't asking me to come back out of love. She was asking me to return because they needed me to keep the family together, to be the maid they knew I was. But the worst came from Ethan. He called me one evening, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "So, how's the big city life, Sarah?" he asked. "Living the high life now, huh? I guess you don't need us anymore." His words cut deeper than I cared to admit. There was no love in his tone, just bitterness. It was clear to me now, Ethan didn't just want me to come back home. He wanted to control me, to break me. I had been nothing to him but a tool, someone to push around to make him feel better about his own life. And now that I was gone, he couldn't handle it. "I don't need you, Ethan," I replied, trying to sound stronger than I felt. "I'm not coming back, not to that house, not to you. I'm building something for myself, and you can't stop me." "Stop pretending, Sarah," he sneered. "You'll be back. You'll realize how stupid you are. And when you do, I'll be here waiting for you to crawl back." I hung up, my heart pounding in my chest. But I wasn't going to let him win. I wasn't going to let my family have control over me anymore. I was going to prove them all wrong. The next day, I woke up to an unexpected message. It was from Bradley Monroe. He had been distant lately, and I couldn't help but wonder if it had something to do with my family. Maybe they were starting to interfere in ways I didn't even realize. But when I read his message, my heart skipped a beat. "Sarah, can you meet me for dinner tonight? I think we need to talk. It's important." I wasn't sure what it was about, but I knew it wasn't just about work. Bradley had been more than just my boss over the past few weeks. He had become someone I admired, someone I was starting to trust. And I couldn't deny it. I felt something for him. Later that evening, I met him at an upscale restaurant near Monroe Tech's office, a place I would have never dared to step foot in before. I was nervous, unsure of how to act. Was he going to tell me I wasn't cut out for this job? That I was too new, too inexperienced? Or was this something more? When I arrived, Bradley was already seated at a table, looking as composed and confident as ever. But when he saw me, his face softened, and he smiled. "Sarah," he said, standing up to greet me, "I'm glad you could make it." I couldn't help but smile back, though I was still on edge. "Of course. What's this about, Bradley?" He gestured for me to sit, and once I did, he ordered wine for both of us. The tension in the air was palpable, and I wondered if he could sense how nervous I was. But then, he spoke. "I've noticed you've been distant lately," he said, his voice low but firm. "I know you're dealing with a lot, and I get that, but I also know you're stronger than you're letting on. I think it's time you finally put your foot down and stop letting others dictate your life." I looked at him, his words sinking in. He was right, I had been distant from my family, distant from him. But what was I really running from? My past? My family's expectations? Or was it just fear of failure? "I've been trying to figure out what's best for me," I said, feeling vulnerable for the first time since I left home. But the more I try to escape, the more they pull me back in. Bradley leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You're not just running from them, Sarah. You're running from yourself. You've spent so much of your life catering to their needs, fulfilling their expectations, that you've lost sight of what you really want. You need to stop running. You need to stand up for yourself." His words hit me harder than anything Ethan or my parents had said. I had been running for so long, but had I ever really stopped to ask myself what I wanted? What did I need to feel fulfilled? Was this job, this life enough? Or was there something more I needed to find within myself? I'm scared, I admitted, surprising myself with the confession. I'm scared I won't be enough. I'm scared of failing, of losing everything. Bradley reached across the table, his hand brushing mine in a comforting gesture. You're already enough, Sarah. You've already made the hardest decision, choosing yourself. Now it's time to keep moving forward no matter what. His touch sent a spark through me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. That maybe, just maybe, I had someone who believed in me, someone who could see past, my family, my mistakes. As the evening wore on, Bradley and I talked about everything, my dreams, his work, our lives. It felt natural, like we'd known each other far longer than just a few months. And when we parted ways, there was a quiet understanding between us, an unspoken bond. But as I left the restaurant, something in my gut told me that things were about to get a lot worse before they got better. The next morning, I woke up to a bombshell. A message from Ethan had come through in the middle of the night. You think you can just walk away, Sarah? Think again. I've got something on you, and you'll regret ever leaving. Don't think you can hide from us forever. I knew then that this wasn't just about family. Ethan wasn't just angry. I could feel that something darker was coming. He was going to stop at nothing to drag me back into the web of control he'd spun for so long. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was playing a dangerous game, and the more I tried to move forward, the more my past seemed to be pulling me back. But this time, I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't. I had come too far. If Ethan wanted a fight, he was going to get one. The days following that dinner with Bradley Monroe felt like a blur. On one hand, I was elated by the connections I was making, the respect I was gaining at Monroe Tech, and the growing sense that I was finally breaking free from my past. On the other hand, my family, specifically Ethan, had declared war on me. And no matter how much I tried to distance myself, it felt like they were always lurking in the shadows, just waiting for their moment to drag me back into the suffocating life I had left behind. But I wasn't going back. Not now, not ever. At work, things were moving fast. Bradley had taken me under his wing, offering me more responsibility. At first, I had been terrified. How could I, someone who had spent the last 30 years being invisible, suddenly handle such important tasks? But as I dove deeper into my work, I realized something. I was good at this, better than I had ever imagined. I worked long hours, stayed late, and pushed myself harder than I ever thought possible. And every time I succeeded, whether it was getting a project done ahead of schedule or solving a problem that seemed impossible, Bradley was there, quietly encouraging me. It felt good. It felt like I was finally earning my place in this world. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were only going to get worse. My family wasn't going to give up on me that easily. I could feel their eyes on me, even from miles away. Ethan had been sending me messages, leaving voicemails, trying to convince me to come back to the fold. He wanted to help me understand my place in the family again. It was always the same, condescending, manipulative, never allowing me the freedom to make my own choices. I didn't know what to expect next. But then, one day, I got the text that made my blood run cold. Ethan, I know what you're doing, Sarah, and I'm telling you right now, you better watch your back. You're not untouchable. You've made some powerful enemies, and it's not just me. There's a lot more at play here than you realize. The truth is, you're expendable. The message was short, cold, and full of menace, but it was the final line that stuck with me. You're expendable. I thought I had escaped them. I thought I had built something that would protect me, but clearly I was wrong. Ethan's words haunted me as I sat at my desk that afternoon, trying to focus on work. My fingers trembled as I typed, but I forced myself to push through. This was the life I had chosen, and I wasn't going to let fear take it away from me. That evening, I went home to my apartment, trying to unwind after a long day. But there was no peace in my thoughts. I kept replaying that message over and over in my head. What did Ethan mean? What did he have planned? And why did it feel like I was always just one step away from losing everything? The knock on the door came at exactly 7:00 p.m. It was soft, tentative, almost as if whoever was on the other side wasn't sure if they were welcome. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I certainly didn't think anyone from my family would be brave enough to show up at my door. I opened it, and to my surprise, it was Ethan. It was Bradley Monroe. "Sarah," he said with a warm smile, his voice a welcome change from the cold tension I had been feeling. "I thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing." I stood frozen in the doorway for a moment, unsure of how to react. Was he really here? Was this just a friendly visit, or was he about to drop some big bombshell on me? "I didn't expect you to come all the way out here," I finally said, stepping aside to let him in. Bradley stepped in, looking around my modest apartment. "It's a nice place," he said, his eyes scanning the space before meeting mine. "But I think you deserve more than this." I felt a warmth spread in my chest at his words. Bradley was different from anyone I had ever met. He didn't see me as a maid, a servant, a nobody. He saw me as someone worthy of more. But that was also the problem. Was he just being kind because I worked for him, or was there something more? "Bradley, you didn't have to come," I said, sitting on the couch, feeling an odd mix of excitement and nervousness. Bradley sat down next to me, his presence calm and reassuring. "Sarah, I've been keeping an eye on you for a while now. You're a hard worker, you've got a lot of potential. But there's something else about you. I see how much you've struggled, how much you've been held back by your past. I just want to make sure you don't let that define you." His words were sincere, and they resonated with me on a level I hadn't expected. For the first time since I left home, someone was telling me I was worth more than the family who had tried to break me. "But my family," I began, the words catching in my throat. "They won't stop. They'll keep coming for me. I can't shake them. They want me to fail." Bradley looked at me, his expression hardening. "If they think they can tear you down, they're mistaken, and I won't let them do it. You've got something they don't have, strength, and that's what's going to make you successful." For the first time in a long while, I believed him. I believed that I was worth something, that I could succeed without my family's approval. I didn't need them. But as Bradley stood up to leave, he turned back to me, his expression suddenly serious. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, almost like a warning, "you need to be careful. Your family doesn't just want you back. They want control. And Ethan, he won't stop until he's dragged you back into that life." My heart raced as I thought about his words. Bradley was right. Ethan wouldn't stop. And it wasn't just me he was after. The following days were filled with unease. Ethan's text had shaken me more than I cared to admit. I knew he had power, but what kind of power? Was he using his influence to threaten me, or was there something bigger at play? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every call, every message, every small gesture seemed like another attempt to reel me back in. I started noticing things in the office, discreet whispers, nervous glances. People around me were acting differently. The tension was rising, and just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I walked into work one morning to find a letter waiting for me on my desk. The seal was familiar, Monroe Tech's logo on the front, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It wasn't from Bradley. It wasn't even from the company. It was from Ethan. In the letter, he made one thing clear. "You're making a mistake, Sarah. I know where you are. I know what you're doing. And I will destroy you if you don't come back to the family." The threat was clear, and for the first time since leaving, I began to wonder, had I made a terrible mistake? But then I looked at my reflection in the window, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the fire return. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I had already come too far. It was time to take control, once and for all. And nothing would stop me from becoming the woman I was meant to be. The letter from Ethan was just the beginning. It was a warning shot across the bow, a clear indication that he wasn't going to let me go without a fight. But as I sat there in my apartment, reading his words over and over, I realized something that terrified me. He wasn't just threatening me. He was preparing to make his move. Ethan always had a way of turning the tables. He was ruthless, calculating, and he always knew how to get what he wanted. But this time, I wasn't going to let him have the upper hand. The next day at work, everything seemed different. It wasn't the usual excitement of going into the office, where I had finally started to feel like I was part of something real, something that was mine. Today, the weight of Ethan's threat loomed over me like a storm cloud. I sat at my desk at Monroe Tech, trying to focus on the reports in front of me, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the letter. What was Ethan planning? How far was he willing to go to bring me back into his world? I knew my family had their connections, but they weren't as powerful as they thought they were. I had worked hard to get to where I was, and I wasn't going to let them tear it down. Just as I was lost in thought, the door to my office opened. I looked up to find Bradley Monroe standing in the doorway, a slight frown on his face. He had been noticing the changes in me, and I knew he could sense something wasn't right. "Sarah," he said, walking into the room. "You seem distracted. Everything okay?" I forced a smile. Just a lot on my plate, nothing I can't handle. Bradley didn't seem convinced. He took a seat across from me, his gaze intense as he studied me. "You're not being honest with me, are you?" I hesitated, unsure of how much I should reveal. Bradley had become someone I trusted, someone I could talk to. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized he wasn't just my boss anymore. He was starting to mean something more to me. "I'm dealing with some personal stuff," I admitted, my voice quieter now. "It's nothing I can't manage, it's just my family. They won't leave me alone." Bradley's expression softened. "You've told me about your family before, but this sounds different. What exactly is going on?" I let out a deep breath. I wasn't sure if it was wise to open up to him completely, but there was something about Bradley that made me feel safe, like I wasn't just some employee to him. I was a person. "Ethan, my brother, he's been trying to control me my whole life. He's the reason I left in the first place, and now he's threatening me." I paused, my heart pounding in my chest as the words I had kept inside for so long finally spilled out. "He sent me a letter. He's threatening to destroy everything I've built here. He doesn't want me to be independent. He wants me back in the family's grip, where I'm nothing but a maid again." Bradley's eyes narrowed as he processed what I said. "That's not just a family issue. That's personal, and he's using your success as leverage." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle on me. Exactly. I thought I could escape, but now I realize that Ethan won't stop until he drags me back into their world. And I can't go back, Bradley. I can't go back to being nothing. Bradley stood up, walking over to the window of my office, his back to me as he stared out over the city. "You're not nothing, Sarah. You fought too hard for that." He turned back to face me, his expression now more determined than ever. "But you're not going to fight this alone. We'll make sure Ethan can't touch you." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so much time trying to protect myself from Ethan's manipulation, trying to deal with it on my own, that I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to fight for me. And Bradley was offering that. But what did it mean? Was this just a professional partnership, or was there something deeper between us? I didn't know, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was ready to find out. But one thing was clear. Bradley had become my ally, and I wasn't about to turn my back on him now. "I don't want to drag you into this, Bradley," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "You have no idea what Ethan is capable of." Bradley walked back to my desk, standing in front of me now. "I'm already involved, Sarah. I've watched you struggle, watched you fight to get here. I won't stand by and let anyone take that away from you. Ethan doesn't scare me." I wasn't sure whether it was his confidence, his belief in me, or just the way he looked at me that made me believe him, but in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of Ethan's threats. Maybe I didn't have all the answers, but I had a partner now, someone who wouldn't let me fall. The next few days were tense. Ethan didn't back down. In fact, he became even more persistent, sending me more messages, more letters, calling me late at night, demanding that I return. His threats grew darker, more personal. But every time I started to waver, I thought about Bradley's words, about how far I had come. I thought about the future I had started to build for myself, something my family could never take away from me. Then, a few days later, I received a phone call from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the area code. It was from my hometown. Ethan was calling again. I picked up the phone, holding my breath. "Sarah," Ethan's voice came through, cold and calculated. "I'm not giving up on you. You'll come back. I'll make sure of it." My hands trembled as I held the phone to my ear. His threats didn't scare me anymore, but they still had the power to make my heart race with fear. "No, Ethan, I'm not coming back," I said, my voice trembling but determined. "You don't control me anymore." I heard a dark chuckle on the other end of the line. "You'll regret this, Sarah. Just remember, you can only run for so long." And with that, he hung up. I dropped the phone onto the desk, my chest tight. But this time, I didn't crumble. I was done running. I had a future, a life, and I wasn't going to let Ethan take it from me. Later that evening, Bradley called me into his office. He looked at me with that calm, steady gaze that had always made me feel like I was more than just an employee. He had a way of making me feel seen in a way no one ever had before. "I've got your back, Sarah," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. "And whatever happens, I'll make sure you come out on top." As the words sank in, I realized something important. This wasn't just about Ethan. It wasn't just about my family. It was about me finally standing up for myself, taking control of my life, and fighting for everything I had worked for. Ethan had tried to take everything from me, but he wasn't going to win. Not this time. The power had shifted, and I was ready for the fight. It had been weeks since I had received Ethan's threatening call. Weeks of constant tension, but also weeks of growth. The weight of my family's manipulation still lingered, but with every passing day, I felt more and more confident that I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I had worked too hard to let Ethan or anyone else control my life. But still, the fear hung over me. It was like a shadow, constantly lurking just out of sight, reminding me that nothing was ever really secure. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart skipped a beat. Was it Ethan? Was it someone from my past trying to drag me back? I had been keeping a low profile, trying to focus on my work and avoid any further contact with my family. But in the back of my mind, I knew it wasn't over. Ethan wouldn't stop until he had me back, and my gut told me that he was planning something bigger than just trying to guilt-trip me into returning home. One evening, as I sat in my office at Monroe Tech, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The sense of unease crept up on me like a slow burn. I'd gotten used to the quiet hum of the office after hours, the soft clicks of keyboards in the distance, but tonight was different. I was working on a new project that had been assigned to me by Bradley, something that required all my focus. The tech industry was fast-paced, and Monroe Tech had been expanding rapidly. But as I tried to concentrate, I noticed a small detail that didn't sit right with me. The security system at the company had been upgraded recently, and yet there was a new access request that I hadn't authorized. Someone had been using my credentials to gain access to company files. I felt a jolt of panic shoot through me. Was Ethan behind this? Had he somehow gotten access to my life here, the one place I thought I could hide? I immediately contacted Bradley, knowing this was something I couldn't handle alone. I needed his help, someone with more power, more experience, someone who could protect me from whatever Ethan was planning. "Bradley, I need to talk to you," I said, my voice tense as I stood up from my desk, packing the room. "There's something going on here, something I don't fully understand. I think my family is trying to interfere with my work, with my life. I don't know how, but I'm scared." Bradley arrived quickly, his expression serious. He knew me well enough to see the fear in my eyes, even when I tried to mask it. "I know this is hard, Sarah," he said, his voice low, reassuring. "But we're going to figure this out. You're not alone in this. I'll help you." We worked late that night, digging into the company's security systems, trying to figure out who had been accessing files they shouldn't have. It didn't take long to find the breach. Bradley's face hardened when he looked at the evidence. "Someone from outside the company got into the system," he said, his voice tight with anger. "But it's strange. Whoever did this used your credentials. They must have been tracking you. This isn't a coincidence." My blood ran cold as I realized just how far Ethan was willing to go. He hadn't just been sending me threats. He had been watching me, watching my every move, trying to control not just my personal life, but my career as well. Whoever it is, they've been getting access to important company data. Bradley continued. This could be corporate espionage, Sarah, and someone might be trying to sabotage Monroe Tech by using you to get to it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ethan wasn't just trying to bring me back into the family fold. He was planning something much worse. The tension was thick in the room as we realized the full extent of the situation. This wasn't just about me anymore. Ethan was playing a dangerous game, and he was willing to destroy everything I had worked for to get what he wanted. We need to make sure that this doesn't escalate, Bradley said, his tone resolute. You've already made it clear you're not going back, but we need to protect the company and we need to protect you. His words sent a chill through me. I had always known Ethan was manipulative, but this was different. He wasn't just threatening me, he was willing to destroy everything I had fought for to get me back under his control. The next day, Bradley made it clear that we had to act fast. The breach in security had triggered several red flags, and we had to secure all company data. We immediately began tightening the company's internal protocols, making sure Ethan's plan wouldn't succeed. But the fear still gnawed at me. I knew Ethan wasn't finished. He was relentless, and as the days passed, I couldn't help but wonder, how far would he go to get what he wanted? That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Sarah Walker, my old friend from my past. She was someone who had once been a part of my life, someone I trusted, but we had lost touch after I left my family. Seeing her brought a flood of memories back, memories of the life I used to have, the people I had left behind. But as I looked at her, I saw something that made my heart sink. She was carrying a package. Sarah, she said quietly, her voice strained. I didn't know who else to turn to. This is for you. It's from your family. I took the package, my hands shaking as I opened it. Inside was a letter from Ethan and a set of photographs, pictures of me at work, taken from a distance. Ethan had been watching me, even when I thought I was safe. The letter was short, but its message was clear. I'm not done with you yet, Sarah. You've made a mistake and you'll regret it. I always get what I want. I stared at the photographs, my heart pounding in my chest. Ethan had been following me, studying my every move. And now it was clear he was getting desperate. He wasn't just threatening me anymore, he was coming for me. But this time, I wasn't going to run. I had worked too hard to build my new life to let him tear it apart. I was going to fight back. I turned to Bradley, who had been standing nearby, watching me carefully. He had seen the letter, seen the fear in my eyes. But this time there was no fear, only resolve. We're going to take the fight to him, I said, my voice steady and clear. I'm done running. This time I'm taking control. Bradley nodded, a sense of pride flickering in his eyes. Let's do this, Sarah. We'll fight this together. The game had changed. Ethan had made his move, but now, so would I, and this time, I wasn't going to lose. No matter what it took, I was going to win. The game had shifted. There was no more running, no more hiding in the shadows, hoping Ethan would forget about me. His plan was in full swing, and I had been foolish to think I could escape it so easily. The power was no longer in my family's hands. It was mine. It was time to play their game, only this time, I would be the one pulling the strings. It was a Wednesday when I received the email. The subject line read, Urgent, security breach, immediate action required. At first, I didn't think much of it. Another glitch, another corporate issue that I'd have to clean up. But when I opened the email and saw the attachment, my blood ran cold. There, in plain sight, was a list of files I'd never seen before, files that had no place on the internal server of Monroe Tech. I stared at the list of names, dates, and confidential documents, the realization dawning on me slowly. It wasn't just Ethan trying to drag me back into the past. He was using Monroe Tech, my job, my new life, as a pawn in a bigger game. He wasn't just trying to ruin me, he was trying to ruin the very company that had given me a chance to stand on my own. The email wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration of war. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, but I wasn't going to break this time. I was done being a victim. I didn't waste any time. The first person I called was Bradley. He was already at the office, working late as usual. Bradley, we've got a serious problem, I said as soon as he picked up. It's Ethan. He's using Monroe Tech's data for something illegal. I heard him curse under his breath, then the sound of him packing. What do you need from me? I need everything we have on him. I need to know who he's connected to, what kind of leverage he's using. I don't care if it's above board or not. I need to stop him, and I need to stop him now. There was a pause on the other end. When he spoke again, his voice was steady. We're not doing this alone, Sarah. If Ethan is playing dirty, we need to fight fire with fire. I felt a rush of relief hearing those words. For the first time in a long time, I knew I wasn't alone in this fight. 2 days later, I was sitting in a small cafe near the Monroe Tech headquarters, staring at a folder of confidential documents Bradley had sent over. They were a goldmine of information, proof of the corporate espionage Ethan had been involved in for months, if not longer. What he had been doing was more than just trying to break me. He was trying to destroy Monroe Tech from the inside, feeding information to competitors, and using my own connections against me. Bradley was right. Ethan wasn't just playing dirty, he was playing for keeps. But I wasn't going to let him win. I looked up from the documents as Bradley walked in. His usually composed demeanor was tempered by a quiet urgency in his movements. He had a plan, I could tell, and for once, it wasn't just about protecting the company. This was personal now. He sat across from me, and without saying a word, he slid a folder across the table. Inside were files on Ethan's financial activities, suspicious transactions, offshore accounts, the works. You were right, he said, his voice low. Ethan has been moving money around in ways that don't make sense, and the connections he's made, well, let's just say we're not the only ones he's been trying to take down. I flipped through the pages, my mind racing. Ethan had connections with powerful people, people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. But this wasn't just about business anymore. It was about Ethan trying to ruin me, and now I was going to make him pay. You're not going to stop me, Ethan, I whispered to myself as I stared at his name printed on the last page of the document. I had spent my life being his pawn, his target. But this time, it was different. I wasn't the one running anymore. I was coming for him. The plan was set. We weren't going to take Ethan down with brute force or a public confrontation. No, this was going to be more subtle, more calculated. The moment I exposed him, there would be no turning back. He would lose everything. Bradley and I spent the next few days meticulously putting together a strategy. We were going to use Ethan's own game against him. With the help of some well-placed allies and the evidence we had gathered, we set the stage for the final move. It wasn't just about getting him fired or ruined financially. It was about making him disappear, making him understand that he couldn't control me anymore. By the time we were ready, everything was in place. Ethan had no idea what was coming. The day of reckoning arrived. I watched as Ethan walked into the boardroom for an impromptu meeting, his arrogant smirk in place, as though he still thought he had the upper hand. But this time, he wasn't the one pulling the strings. It was my turn. Bradley and I were already seated at the table when he entered. There was a flicker of confusion in his eyes when he saw us, but he quickly masked it with a smile. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "Another one of your corporate tricks, Sarah." I couldn't help but smile. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. "Actually, Ethan, this isn't a corporate trick," I said, my voice calm and confident. "This is the beginning of the end for you." He laughed, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "You think you can take me down? I've been playing this game for years, Sarah. You've never stood a chance." I met his gaze, my heart steady. "You're right, I never had a chance, but you did. And now I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are." I pressed a button on the remote, and the large screen behind me lit up with images of Ethan's financial records, the illegal transactions, and the evidence we had spent weeks collecting. I watched as his face drained of color. For the first time, Ethan didn't have a clever response. He was cornered, exposed. "What's this?" he stammered, his eyes wide with fear. "This is everything you've been doing behind the scenes," I said, my voice colder than ice. "You thought you could use me, use Monroe Tech to get ahead, but you're wrong, Ethan, you're done, and there's nowhere for you to run." The silence in the room was deafening. Ethan knew he had been outplayed. But I wasn't done yet. I turned to Bradley, who nodded once, a look of approval in his eyes. "Ethan," I said slowly, savoring the moment, "you'll never have control over me again, not in business, not in my life, you're done." As I watched his face twist with rage, I knew this was only the beginning. Ethan had tried to tear me down, but now it was my turn to take everything he had worked for. And I wasn't stopping until he had nothing left. My story continues. Let me know if you want to watch the remaining part of my story. Share your thought in the comment below.